In the early 1980s, in a remote village in Texas with dry lands and harsh living conditions, a boy named Jack Coleman was born. Jack grew up in a poor family where his parents worked as cattle herders. His childhood was tied to days of running barefoot across parched fields, herding livestock through water-scarce lands. His parents worked tirelessly, earning just enough to get by. One evening, as Jack sat by the campfire, his father said, "Jack, life is tough. If you want to change your fate, you need to look beyond these hills." Those words stayed with Jack. However, at 16, going to college was an impossible dream for him, as his family couldn't afford it. He had to drop out of school and take up odd jobs herding cattle, fixing fences, and earning meager wages to survive. One day, while working on the ranch, Jack noticed a group of strangers arriving in the village. They brought modern equipment and set up a drilling rig on a nearby piece of land. Curious, Jack asked his father about them. His father explained they were oil explorers. Jack was immediately fascinated. He didn't know much about oil, but he could sense it was the energy source the world desperately needed. Jack decided to join the drilling crew. At first, they gave him the lowest-ranking job cleaning machines and doing heavy labor. While most workers stuck to their assigned tasks, Jack observed everything closely. He spent his spare time studying how the equipment operated and kept notes in a small notebook. Over 5 years, Jack worked his way up to become a technician, directly overseeing drilling operations. However, he soon realized that to advance further, he needed formal knowledge. At 25, Jack saved every penny he could and enrolled in evening classes to study petroleum engineering. By day, he worked tirelessly. By night, he studied, often sleeping only 3 to 4 hours a day. After years of hard work, Jack earned his certificate and was offered a job at a major oil company in Houston. There, Jack honed his skills and became one of the most sought-after experts in oilfield operations in the region. At 30, Jack made a bold decision to quit his job and start his own business. He took out a bank loan and purchased a barren piece of land near his hometown, the same land where he had seen drilling rigs as a boy. Many people laughed at him, calling him crazy for betting everything on a desolate plot of land. But Jack believed in his abilities and the geological knowledge he had gained. Jack personally supervised the drilling of his first well. The first few months were disastrous. No oil was found. He fell into debt, and many advised him to give up, but Jack refused. He drilled some more wells, and on a hot summer day in 1995, the third well struck a massive oil reserve. That moment changed his life forever. With his first oil strike, Jack didn't splurge on luxuries. Instead, he reinvested every dollar back into expanding his operations. He hired skilled engineers, purchased modern equipment, and optimized production methods. Within 3 years, Jack's company, Coleman Energy, became one of the leading independent oil companies in Texas. Jack didn't stop at oil drilling. He began building a distribution network, acquiring smaller companies, and even investing in renewable energy. By the age of 45, Jack had become the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar energy empire. Despite his incredible success, Jack never forgot his humble beginnings. He returned to the village where he was born and built schools, hospitals, and infrastructure to support the community. Jack often stood in front of young students and said, "I was once a poor cattle boy with nothing but my hands and a dream. If I could do it, so can you." Jack's story is not just about rising from poverty to wealth. It's a testament to perseverance, vision, and courage. In a public speech, Jack once said, "This world won't give you anything for free. But if you're willing to work hard, learn, and never give up, you can build the future you dream of." Today, Coleman Energy is not only a leading oil corporation, but also a symbol of resilience. Jack Coleman's story continues to inspire millions worldwide, from oil rig workers to young dreamers hoping to change their lives. From a homeless drifter to the CEO of a car manufacturing empire, Michael Garrett's journey. On a cold morning in 1984, in the outskirts of Detroit, the city once hailed as the automotive capital of America, a young man named Michael Garrett sat huddled in a narrow alleyway. He had nothing but a tattered coat, an old backpack, and a few coins in his pocket. Michael was the son of a factory worker who had been laid off and a house cleaner struggling to make ends meet. His family had crumbled when the factory his father worked at shut down, and after a tragic car accident took his parents' lives, Michael was left to wander the streets. Homeless, jobless, and without a clear future, Michael often stood by the roadside, watching cars zip by. To him, those cars weren't just vehicles, they were symbols of freedom and power to things he thought he'd never have. One day, while scavenging through a dumpster for food, Michael stumbled upon an old newspaper with the headline, "The auto industry must reinvent itself to survive." The article detailed the collapse of Detroit's aging factories and the need for fresh ideas to revive the struggling industry. That story sparked something in Michael. He had nothing to his name, but he had always been fascinated by cars, especially race cars he'd seen on TV as a child. That night, Michael made a decision to change his destiny. He began looking for any job, no matter how small, at local auto repair shops. Eventually, a small repair garage hired him as a janitor for meager pay, just enough to keep him fed. Michael didn't just clean the shop. Every evening, after the others had gone home, he stayed behind to learn how to dismantle and reassemble car parts from old, broken-down vehicles. He studied how engines worked, how braking systems were built, and how to optimize a car's performance. He also spent countless hours at the public library, devouring every book and manual on automotive technology he could find. Within 2 years, Michael had transitioned from janitor to skilled mechanic. The garage owner recognized his talent and passion, giving him more responsibilities, such as repairing engines and consulting with customers. But Michael wasn't satisfied with being a mechanic. He dreamed bigger. He wanted to create his own car. By 1990, in a market dominated by luxury and high-speed vehicles, Michael identified a massive opportunity, building durable, affordable cars for working-class people like his late father. He wanted to design cars that were low-cost, easy to repair, and suited for middle-class families and workers across America. To pursue his vision, Michael decided to open his own workshop. Using his small savings and a microloan from a nonprofit that helped the homeless, he rented an old warehouse and got to work. Initially, Michael's team consisted of just 3 friends he'd met at the repair shop, all working long hours to develop a prototype of their first car. The first car Michael produced, called the Garrett Model 1, wasn't a technological marvel. It was simple, unpolished, but incredibly durable and fuel-efficient. Most importantly, it was 20% cheaper than other vehicles in its class. Michael drove the prototype to small businesses, factories, and auto fairs, pitching it tirelessly. Gradually, he caught the attention of small distributors and a few transportation companies looking for budget-friendly vehicles. Over the next 2 years, sales of the Garrett Model 1 grew steadily. Michael reinvested every dollar he earned into production, improving his designs and expanding operations. By the year 2000, Garrett Motors was officially born, with a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility in Detroit that brought thousands of jobs back to the city. Michael wasn't just building cars, he was rebuilding a community. Michael didn't stop at affordable cars. He began investing in research for eco-friendly automotive technology. In 2010, Garrett Motors launched its first electric car at an accessible price point, revolutionizing the industry. Competing with major brands like Tesla, Garrett Motors made electric vehicles affordable for middle-income families, opening the door to a greener future. Today, Garrett Motors is a global automotive powerhouse with millions of cars sold worldwide. Michael has become one of America's most respected billionaires, yet he remains humble, frequently returning to Detroit to meet and support workers like the one he once was. Michael often shares his story at universities and conferences, especially with young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. He tells them, "I was once homeless, penniless, and without a future. But I had one thing no one could take away, my belief that I could change my life. If I could do it, so can you." From the slums to NASA, the journey of a poor student who became a top engineer. In a slum filled with trash and noise in the suburbs of Los Angeles, where violence and poverty were a way of life, a young boy named Carlos Ramirez grew up in a rundown one-bedroom house. Carlos's parents were Mexican immigrants who worked tirelessly in sweatshops and construction sites to make ends meet. His family often ate rice and beans, and many days they couldn't afford fresh food. Carlos was a bright kid, but his classmates often mocked him for his shabby clothes and worn-out shoes, which he had to wear for years. At school, Carlos was the quiet boy sitting at the back of the class, knowing that no one wanted to be friends with the slum kid. But there was one thing that set Carlos apart: his insatiable curiosity about the world around him. One day, when Carlos was about 10 years old, he saw a plane flying across the sky and asked his mom, "How can planes fly, Mom?" She didn't know how to answer, but she told him, "You'll have to find the answer yourself." "Read, Carlos," Books are the key to escaping this place. From that day on, Carlos spent every afternoon after school at the local public library. He devoured anything he could find, from physics textbooks to stories about famous scientists. He was especially fascinated by stories about NASA and space exploration. It was then that a dream took root in his mind. One day, he would work for NASA. In high school, Carlos remained a target of ridicule. When he told his teachers and classmates that he wanted to become an aerospace engineer, most of them laughed. One classmate bluntly said, "Carlos, look at yourself. Do you really think NASA is going to hire a slum kid like you?" Those words didn't discourage Carlos, they only fueled his determination. However, his family situation posed another challenge. Carlos's parents wanted him to drop out after high school to work and support the family. He had to convince them that he could both work and go to school. To prove it, he took a part-time job at an auto repair shop. Even though he was exhausted, Carlos consistently earned the highest grades in his class, especially in math and physics. One day, his science teacher, Mr. Stevens, noticed Carlos's potential. He called him aside after class and said, "Carlos, you have incredible talent, but you need to dream bigger. If you want to work at NASA, you need to push yourself harder and ignore what everyone else says." With Mr. Stevens' help, Carlos applied for a scholarship and was accepted into the University of California, a prestigious school for aerospace engineering. However, his journey was far from easy. Carlos faced prejudice as one of the few students from a low-income background. Many of his peers came from wealthy families and had access to better education growing up. But Carlos refused to let that discourage him. To pay for his education, Carlos worked 3 part-time jobs, including delivering pizzas and working at the campus library. He slept only a few hours a night, but his goal never wavered. Instead of partying or socializing like his peers, Carlos spent his time in the school lab, working on projects to build model spacecraft and drones. In his 3rd year of college, Carlos submitted a research paper on optimizing rocket engines to NASA. His work received high praise, and he was invited to intern at the Kennedy Space Center. When Carlos arrived at NASA, he realized it was an extremely competitive and high-pressure environment. As an intern, he worked alongside some of the best engineers in the world. Many doubted his abilities due to his young age and humble background. One colleague once told him, "Kid, leave this work to the professionals who actually know what they're doing." But Carlos didn't let the negativity hold him back. He spent hours researching and learning from his peers, unafraid to ask questions or put in extra effort. He began to stand out when he introduced innovative ideas for designing cooling systems for spacecraft, reducing production cost and increasing efficiency. His project impressed NASA's leadership team. A few years later, Carlos became the lead engineer on a major NASA project designing engines for a new spacecraft heading to Mars. He was the youngest in the project's leadership team, but also one of the most crucial contributors. When the spacecraft successfully landed on Mars and transmitted its first images, Carlos broke down in tears. He knew he had not only proven his doubters wrong, but also achieved the dream he nurtured since childhood. Today, Carlos is one of NASA's top engineers, recognized by scientific organizations worldwide. But for Carlos, the titles and accolades aren't what matter most. What matters is inspiring kids who come from backgrounds like his. He frequently returns to the slums where he grew up, organizing science workshops and telling kids, "It doesn't matter where you come from or what others think of you. The only thing that matters is that you believe in yourself. If I could do it, so can you." From a poor slum kid to the CEO of a semiconductor empire, the journey of Ethan Walker. In 1990, in a rundown slum on the outskirts of San Jose, California, just a stone's throw from the glitzy Silicon Valley, there lived a young boy named Ethan Walker. Ethan grew up in a shabby house where the walls were moldy, and the only light at night came from a flickering bulb hanging by a threadbare wire. His family survived on the meager wages his mother earned as a janitor cleaning office buildings downtown. Ethan's father had abandoned the family when he was just 5 years old, leaving Ethan and his mother to fend for themselves. Despite the hardships, Ethan had a curious mind and a passion for discovering how things worked. He would often collect discarded electronics from a nearby junkyard, bringing home old circuit boards and processors to take apart. He wasn't always successful most of the time, he just broke things, but he was fascinated by the mystery of how they functioned. To the other kids in the slum, Ethan was the weird kid who wasted time on junk. At school, Ethan wasn't a standout student. His tattered clothes and patched-up backpack made him a target for mockery. Some teachers pitied him, noticing how he spent hours doodling circuit diagrams in his notebook instead of paying attention to lectures. One day, Ethan stood up in class and declared that he wanted to become an inventor and create world-changing technology. The room erupted in laughter. One kid shouted, "Ethan, you can't even afford a computer. How are you going to change the world?" Their ridicule stung, but Ethan refused to let it crush his dream. When Ethan was 15, his mother lost her job due to health issues, plunging the family into deeper financial crisis. Ethan had to step up and take a part-time job cleaning floors at a local electronics store. Though the job was physically demanding, Ethan couldn't help but be drawn to the shelves lined with shiny components and gadgets. The store's owner, an elderly man named Mr. Carter, noticed Ethan's unusual interest. One evening, he asked, "Why do you keep staring at those chips?" Ethan answered with passion, "I want to know how they make computers work. One day, I want to create better chips." Impressed by his enthusiasm, Mr. Carter allowed Ethan to take home old, unsellable components to experiment with. This gesture opened up a new world for Ethan. He spent nights tinkering with the salvaged parts, figuring out how to assemble circuits, and even building rudimentary devices with the help of books from the public library. It was during these late-night experiments that Ethan began to understand the power of semiconductors, the brain of every electronic device, and realized their potential to revolutionize the world. At age 18, Ethan entered a statewide science competition for high school students. He built a prototype of a simple semiconductor chip that processed data faster and consumed less energy than most commercial chips on the market. Ethan had spent countless sleepless nights creating this chip using scrap materials and makeshift tools. Although he didn't win the grand prize, his project caught the attention of a professor from Stanford University. The professor, impressed by Ethan's ingenuity and determination, offered him a full scholarship to study electrical engineering. At Stanford, Ethan worked tirelessly, often juggling his studies with part-time jobs at university labs to make ends meet. He spent countless hours in the library, devouring books on semiconductor history, learning how industry giants like Intel and AMD rose to prominence, and understanding the challenges of designing high-performance chips. One day, while working on a research project, Ethan had a bold idea: to design a new type of chip that could process data for artificial intelligence AI systems, but at a fraction of the cost. His vision was to make advanced computing accessible not just to big corporations, but to small businesses worldwide. After graduating, Ethan turned down lucrative job offers from major tech companies to start his own venture. He pooled all his savings to rent a small warehouse and purchase basic equipment. Along with 3 college friends, he began developing the first prototype of his revolutionary chip. Ethan's startup, Walker Semiconductors, began with little money and countless obstacles. Most investors scoffed at the idea of a young man from a poor background trying to compete with industry titans like Intel and NVIDIA. Ethan spent months pitching his vision, only to face rejection after rejection. But he didn't give up. He and his team continued refining their product, optimizing the chip's design to achieve better performance. Eventually, a venture capital firm saw the potential in Ethan's work and agreed to provide seed funding. With this lifeline, Ethan was able to produce the first batch of chips. Walker Semiconductors quickly gained attention in the tech world for its high-performance yet affordable chips. Within 2 years, the company secured a major contract with a Japanese tech giant, giving Ethan the resources to scale up production. By 2020, Walker Semiconductors had grown into one of the leading semiconductor companies in the world. Its chips powered everything from computers and smartphones to IoT devices and self-driving cars. Ethan Walker, once a poor boy ridiculed for his ambitions, had become a billionaire and a global symbol of resilience and innovation. Despite his wealth, Ethan never forgot his roots. He established a scholarship fund to support underprivileged students passionate about technology, helping countless young people follow in his footsteps. Ethan often speaks at universities and tech conferences, sharing his story to inspire the next generation of dreamers. He tells them, "I wasn't the smartest person nor the most talented, but I never stopped believing in myself. Life will doubt you, mock you, and knock you down, but if you keep pushing forward, you can rewrite your story."